Breaking, Ottawa declares Canada's freshwater a public trust. Exports are off the table. Welcome to Canada Next for detailed analysis.
What he's referring to is the fact that the power of the river, the water in the river, could be harnessed before it reaches the Pacific Ocean. He would do that within American territory, not within Canadian.
Officials warn exports would create dangerous dependency and harm ecosystems. Sovereignty comes first.
Something strange is happening behind closed doors. A quiet but powerful struggle, not over oil, not over gold, but over water. Yes, the most basic element of life itself.
Colombia announced that the U.S. government has paused negotiations on the expansive Columbia River Treaty, saying the current administration is reviewing its international engagement.
Could soon spark a new kind of war between two of the world's closest allies, the United States and Canada. It all began with a single statement from Donald Trump, a statement that many dismissed as political noise, until it wasn't. Trump said, "They have millions of gallons of water pouring down from the north. Canada's got a giant faucet." At first, it sounded casual, but experts knew exactly what he was hinting at. America's eyes were turning north, toward Canada's endless freshwater reserves. Because while Canada's land glitters with ice, rivers, and lakes, the United States is drying out. The Colorado River, once mighty enough to carve canyons through rock, now barely reaches the sea.
The deadly and devastating wildfires in Los Angeles are drawing new attention to U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's comments about one of Canada's most valued natural resources.
Lake Mead, one of the largest reservoirs in the U.S., has dropped to its lowest level in history. Farmers in California are watching their lands crack apart. Cities like Phoenix and Las Vegas are fighting for every drop. And in the middle of that desperation, Trump's words hit like a shockwave. Why not get water from Canada? After all, the two countries share borders, trade, and history. To some, it sounded like a simple partnership. To others, it sounded like a threat. Canada's response was swift and cold as the glaciers themselves. Prime Minister Mark Carney stood before the world and said, "Water is not for sale. It's not a commodity, it's our identity." That single statement changed everything.
Millions of gallons of water pouring down from the north with the snow caps in Canada and all pouring down. And they have essentially a very large faucet.
It wasn't just a policy, it was a declaration. Canada's water would stay Canadian, period. To understand why that answer was so absolute, you need to understand what water means to Canada. It's not just a resource, it's part of their soul. Nearly 1/5 of the world's fresh water flows through Canadian rivers and lakes. It shapes their geography, feeds their forests, powers their industry, and defines their pride. Selling water for most Canadians isn't just wrong, it's unthinkable. But south of the border, the situation grows darker by the year. Reservoirs are collapsing, crops are dying. Tens of millions of Americans could soon face water shortages. Even billion-dollar desalination plants and recycling systems can't keep up with the speed of climate collapse. And that's where the real tension begins, because desperation has a way of blurring moral lines. To many Americans, Trump's idea started to make sense. Why not share what nature gave in abundance to someone else? But in Canada, those same words echoed like an alarm bell. Because once you open the door to water trade, you open the door to losing control. Economists warned if Canada ever begins exporting water, international trade laws could eventually force them to keep doing it. Private corporations, foreign investors, and even international courts could gain influence over Canada's own natural lifeline. And that's what Prime Minister Carney was truly afraid of. He didn't just speak as a politician, he spoke as a strategist. He said, "The moment you sell water, you sell a piece of your future." Behind that calm statement was a harsh truth. Once a country treats water as a product, it stops being a right. It becomes a currency, one that can be traded, taxed, or taken. So while the U.S. views Canada's water as a potential solution, Canada views it as something sacred, the foundation of sovereignty itself. It's not about greed, it's about survival. And in an era where the climate is turning hostile, water may soon be the most valuable resource on Earth. The cracks in this relationship are already forming. Washington calls for cooperation. Ottawa calls it protection. Both use the language of diplomacy, but behind that there's fear, pressure, and quiet preparation. Because make no mistake, if droughts worsen, if cities begin to run dry, the world's next great conflict might not be over oil fields or borders. It could be over water pipelines stretching from the Great Lakes into the American desert. And that possibility is not science fiction. It's a conversation already happening behind the scenes in think tanks and policy rooms. Canada's waters, vast, ancient, and untamed, have always been the veins of a living planet. But now, those same veins are under pressure. The rise in global temperatures, melting glaciers, and shifting rainfall have already begun to test the limits of Canada's ecosystems. Every degree of heat, every drought, every lost river delta whispers the same warning. Once the balance breaks, there may be no turning back. That's why the idea of diverting water southward isn't just controversial, it's dangerous. Experts say it could disrupt fragile habitats, destroy fish populations, and unravel entire watersheds that have existed for millennia. In simpler terms, one pipeline could rewrite the map of life itself. To Mark Carney, the Prime Minister who drew a line in the sand, the issue is not economics, it's existence. In his words, short-term profit means nothing if it costs the stability of nature itself. His warning was not only for Canada, but for the entire world, because once water becomes a traded commodity, humanity enters a new and perilous chapter where access to life itself is decided by price tags and power, not by need. Imagine a world where clean water is no longer a right, but a privilege, where billion-dollar corporations control rivers and nations bid for survival. Carney called it the path humanity cannot afford to take. Yet, south of the border, many see it differently. To President Trump's supporters, this is not a crisis. It's an opportunity, a chance to make deals, build pipelines, and share what nature gave in abundance to one nation and denied to another. They call it cooperative flow. But in Canada, that phrase doesn't sound like partnership. It sounds like invasion, because for Canadians, water isn't just something to measure in gallons or export for profit. It's part of who they are. It flows through their identity, their land, their culture. Selling it would feel like selling a piece of their soul. That's why every mention of cross-border water pipelines sparks fear rather than excitement. Fear of quiet erosion, not of land, but of sovereignty. Beneath this political storm lies a deeper divide, a philosophical one. One side views water as a market resource, the other as a sacred trust. One believes in profit, the other in preservation. And that clash isn't just between two countries, it's between two ways of thinking about the future of our planet. Across the American West, the consequences of scarcity are already visible. Valleys that once bloomed with crops now lie barren. Reservoirs that once powered entire cities are half empty. The Colorado River is drying faster than science predicted. Each year, the distance between supply and demand widens, and desperation grows. Environmental analysts warn that the moment a nation starts diverting water from distant lands, it has already crossed a line, a point where survival depends on someone else's sacrifice. And history shows, once an industry begins, it rarely stops. Oil pipelines became empires. Water pipelines could do the same. That is the future Canada refuses to repeat. Instead of chasing profit, Ottawa has turned its focus inward, investing billions into conservation, clean energy, and ecosystem restoration. It's not just environmental policy, it's a strategy of defense, a plan to protect sovereignty through sustainability. Because in the 21st century, national security is not just about borders or armies, it's about the ability to protect what keeps you alive. For Carney, this mission goes deeper than politics. It's about stewardship, the belief that a nation must leave its natural wealth in better condition than it inherited. He has warned that if Canada ever opened its water trade, control could be lost within a single generation. Contracts would bind governments, corporations would dictate terms, and Canada's most sacred resource could fall under international law. Water would no longer belong to the people, it would belong to the market. Still, the pressure continues to rise. Drought is tightening its grip across the United States. Fields are dying, rivers are fading, and cities are running out of time. And when a superpower begins to thirst, diplomacy often turns into demand. That's why Canada's position has shifted from diplomacy to defense, treating water not as an economic topic, but as a matter of national survival. Mark Carney's words, "Canada's water is not for sale," have become more than policy. They've become a declaration of identity, a message to the world that some resources cannot be priced, parceled, or negotiated, because to sell them would be to surrender the very meaning of independence. But this standoff reveals something even bigger, a glimpse into humanity's future. The age of oil defined the last century. The age of water may define the next. Across the globe, from Africa to Asia, nations are already preparing for what experts call the water wars. Battles not fought over ideology or power, but over the last drops of clean survival. And in this new era, Canada holds one of the world's most precious advantages: freshwater abundance. Endless lakes that reflect the sky like mirrors, glaciers older than civilization, rivers that pulse across provinces like arteries of a living earth. These are not just natural wonders. They are instruments of power and symbols of responsibility. For the United States, this reality poses a test: how to balance diplomacy with desperation. For Canada, it presents a challenge: how to protect abundance without isolation. Because if history has taught anything, it's that cooperation built on respect lasts longer than control built on need. The balance will be fragile. Every conversation, every treaty, every handshake between these two nations will carry consequences far beyond trade. It will decide how humanity values life itself. Experts say this debate, playing out quietly across North America, may be the first chapter in a much larger story. As climate pressures grow and water scarcity spreads, the decisions made here could set the template for every nation that follows. Because this is no longer just about rivers and treaties, it's about survival, about power, about the most essential element of life and who controls it. The age of water has begun, and what happens next will shape the destiny of nations. This is the New World Times.